Okay, so today we're going to talk about torts. And torts are different than crimes in that we said crimes are an offense against the public at large. And that's why the government takes up the crime on your behalf, excuse me, and charges and prosecutes that for you. Torts are different. Torts are between private citizens. So the definition of a tort is a private wrong committed by one individual against another. Did you catch that? Did you write it down? Do you want me to say it again?
Yes, please.
A tort is a private wrong
tool for identifying self-talk is the use of
committed by one individual against another. Usually, it's going to be something that has harmed someone's physical being, but a tort can also be against somebody's reputation, which could inhibit their ability to make money. A tort can also be against somebody's emotional health. And so you hear about sometimes in cases where people get sued, not only for physical injury, but for pain and suffering. This is where that pain and suffering comes in. Pain, suffering can be mental as well as physical. This is where the big money is in law. So, first of all, when you're talking about torts, understand that you are never, the remedy in torts is never going to be jail time. There's no such thing as jail time for a tort. There's jail time for crime. The remedy for torts is usually damages, which is money. Usually damages, which is money. What you're trying to do is you're trying to use money to put the plaintiff in the position that they would have been in before the tort occurred. Is this all making sense, or am I going too fast? Or if you're not, what's that, Kian?
It all making sense.
Awesome. Okay. So, so that's what you're trying to do. Also, many of these go to court and go to a jury trial. There is a difference in standard for the for a criminal trial and for a civil trial. This is civil court. And when we talked about a jury having to make a decision in a criminal trial, we said that they have to determine that somebody is guilty beyond the shadow of a reasonable doubt. That means they've got to be 100% sure that the person did it. That's because we don't want to deprive somebody of their life, liberty, and property if we have even the smallest chance that we think they didn't do it. But the standard is much lower in tort law, because here we're not locking anybody up, we're just taking their money. And in tort law, we're only looking, Alex, are you drinking beer already this morning? Oh, okay. See how easily distracted I am? In tort law, we're looking for a preponderance of the evidence, which means we only have to be 51% sure that the defendant did it. That's a much lower standard. 51% sure versus 100% sure in criminal law. Do you get that? So that's why I put the O.J. Simpson video up for you to see this week. And I know it looks like there's 3. There's actually only 1. So this is a really good case to use to understand the difference in standard between criminal and civil law. So in the O.J. Simpson case, when he was accused in the criminal trial of murdering his wife and her friend, he was found not guilty. That's because they could not prove to the jury with 100% confidence that he actually committed the crime. And there were several reasons for that we can talk about. But then the young man who was murdered, the friend of Nicole Smith, his father sued O.J. Simpson for a wrongful death suit. And wrongful death is an intentional tort. We'll talk about what intentional means in a moment. And when he sued for that, O.J. Simpson was found that he was indeed liable for committing wrongful death of Ron Smith. And therefore, he owed the family money. So you can be found not guilty in a criminal court, but you can still be found guilty or liable in the civil trial because that standard is so different, 51% to 100%. Okay? So let's talk about the intentional torts to begin with. So first of all, intent with tort law is going to be very similar to what we talked about with the mens rea when we talked about criminal law. It means you had the mind, you meant to do it, you knew what you were doing, and you set out to do it. Very often when you're charged with a crime, you're going to end up in civil court for the same thing, getting sued by the individual who you committed the crime against. So a lot of times you're going to get the double whammy on this. So let's talk about what some of the intentional torts are, okay? The principal intentional torts are going to include, and these are going to sound like the crimes that we talked about, but they're going to be things like assault, battery, false imprisonment, defamation, invasion of privacy, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Are you writing these down? It could be wrongful death. It could be fraud. Something else is coming in. Any of those can be, more people coming in. Any of those can be intentional. So we're going to go through those. Questions so far? I've been talking for 10 straight minutes. That's a lot for me. No questions? I'm doing a great job. All right. Okay, Joshua, you're yawning. Am I boring you? You just sleepy? I'm sleepy too. I woke up this morning absolutely convinced that today was Wednesday. And imagine my surprise. Okay, so let's talk about what some of those are. So assault occurs when, I'm sorry? You guys good? Actually, before I go through those, I wanted to also mention the doctrine of respondeat superior. Respondeat superior is also the doctrine, and this is important for you, especially if you all own businesses or become employers. It's also known as vicarious liability, respondeat superior, vicarious liability. And this is the idea that if somebody, an employee commits an act, a tortious act or a criminal act in the course of employment for you, then the owner of the business is going to be responsible. So let me give you an example of that. Let's go back to our heater. Remember our heater that blew up and killed the little girl? We can never get rid of this horrible thing, right? Let's say we found out that Alex was the owner of that company, but Alex obviously doesn't make the heaters. He owns the company. He's busy running around all day doing whatever it is that Alexes do. And we realize that, that let's say, Jade, are you there today?
Yes.
Okay. So, so Jade is the one who is on the floor manufacturing the heaters. And Jade has an evil little heart. And she decides that she's going to deliberately miswire the heaters to make them short out. We all don't like Jade very much right now, do we? So when that heater explodes and kills that little girl, can we come after Alex and his company?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can. Alex, you hired wrong. Respondent superior, you're responsible for the actions of your employees. So when you hire somebody knowing that, you see why it's important to do background checks, get references, that kind of thing. Because if your employee decides to pull a Jade and sabotage your business or cause harm to somebody, you're going to eat that problem. You're going to be just as liable, even though you might have had nothing to do with it. You might be in a remote employer from somewhere else. Questions? Thoughts? Okay. Very important when you own a business to understand that. What that means is, because when let's say the family of the child is going to sue, what's going to happen is they're going to bring a suit for wrongful death. And you can't really put a price on losing a child, but that's exactly what they're going to try to do in the courtroom. They're going to try to figure out the monetary loss to the parents for losing this child. And that's going to include things like pain and suffering and emotional distress. And so what's going to happen is they're not going to go after Jade because she just works in the factory, you know. Does she have money? Probably not. When they sue for torts, you go after the deep pockets. You always look for the deepest pockets you can. And so they're going to go after Alex because he's the business owner. And Alex is going to end up owing these parents money for whatever their child's life was worth. And nobody thinks their child's life is worth $25,000, by the way. Everybody's going to say their child's life was worth millions. And the emotional distress of losing a child, millions. And here's how you figure stuff like that out. I'm a mom. Would I pay $10 a day for the rest of my natural life to not have to bury one of my children?
Yes.
Oh, you better believe it. Would I pay $30 a day?
Yes.
Would I pay $100 a day?
You're going to do what you got to do, really.
Mm-hmm. So
That's every mama.
Every mama. So let's think about it. I might pay, let's be conservative. Let's not even be generous here. $100 a day for the rest of my life to not bury one of my children because of that level of emotional distress. Well, $100 a day times 365 days a year is what? Over $36,000 a year of emotional distress. I can reasonably, because I'm still fairly young, I can reasonably live another 50 years. But let's say I won't. Let's say I'm going to live another 40 years. $36,000 times 40, that's a whole lot of millions of dollars. I can't even do the math. That's how you come up with these huge amounts of money in these suits. And that's why a suit like that, ooh, what was that, Joshua? You did good. You showed me a number. How much money am I going to say?
1.46 million.
And that's just for the emotional distress. That's just for the, and that's only if my kids are only worth $100 a day. But if I'm sitting here on a jury and I'm listening to this case, I'm thinking, like Takaria said, mama's going to pay more than $100 a day not to bury her children. I bet you I'd pay $1,000 a day not to bury my children till I went bankrupt. $500 a day. Right? Ask your parents how much they would pay to keep you alive. Unless your parents hate you. And let's put it this way, if your parents don't say any amount of money possible, you need to rethink what you're going to do with your parents when they're old and start looking at nursing homes now. Okay? Because your parents should say, I love you, I would give my life for you. That's what they should be saying to you. So think about that. So really, when you get these lawsuits and you always hear about these really enormous amounts of money or really enormous amounts of damages, this is where this is coming from. Now, who's really getting all that money? Well, here's the thing about tort law. So tort law is one of the types of cases that lawyers can bring on contingency. Does anyone know what that means? No? All right, let me tell you. A contingency case means that the lawyer does not get paid unless they win the case. And if they win the case, they get a percentage of the damages. This is not going to be something that you can do in a lot of kinds of cases. You don't do this in criminal law. You don't do this in family law, nothing like that. But this is a very lucrative field of law. Why do you think you always have these guys on television advertising, have you been wrongfully injured? Because they usually take about 30 to 40% of the damages. Now, they may work for several years for you on this case, and they may not be getting a dime. But if they win, when they win, and they're only going to take cases they really think they can win, they're going to win big. Because you may get that $5 million settlement, but 40% of it may go to the attorney right off the top. So keep that in mind. So if you're going into law, this is where the money is. This is where the big money is. These are the ambulance chasers. These are not the people that make a difference in the world, but these are the people that make a whole lot of money. So, so that's one of the things that tort law makes it very accessible. This is why you have so many of these tortious lawsuits, because it's very accessible for people to get to the court. You as a plaintiff can go to the courtroom and you can have an attorney and you don't have to worry about how to pay for it if you can get a lawyer to work for you like this on contingency. So it does make justice in a sense a little more accessible. On the other hand, it also makes frivolous lawsuits and lawsuits more common because, for example, think about the lady that burned herself with the coffee at McDonald's, right? We mentioned her before. If she had had to hire her own attorney and bring a suit against McDonald's, she might not have done that. But when a lawyer jumps out of the woodwork and he grabs her and says, let's sue McDonald's, I think you've got a really good case here, and you don't have to pay unless you win. And he takes that case and he wins, and he won a lot of money. They won a lot of money with the hot coffee case. That lawyer is very rich. That's how that works. Can't do that with criminal law, can't do that with like family law cases, can't do that with divorce cases. Those things you have to pay up front for. A lawyer's not allowed to take those things on contingency because there might be a conflict of interest there. So questions on this so far? We'll revisit some of this after. Okay, so getting back to the intentional torts. So we've already defined what assault and battery are criminally. And really, assault and battery are the same things in tort law. It just means that in addition to the government coming after you, let's say for an unwanted touching, then you can also, if you are the victim of an unwanted touching, then you can also bring a civil suit against the perpetrator for an unwanted touching. So as a victim of sexual assault, for example, not only may the government go after your attacker and put this individual in prison, but you may personally sue the attacker for sexual assault. And so again, imagine not only maybe the physical trauma, but the emotional trauma of having been sexually assaulted. How much money would you pay per day for the rest of your life to never have to live with the trauma of sexual assault? I mean, both men and women can be sexually assaulted. Would you pay $10 a day to never be sexually assaulted?
I pay a lot of money.
Yeah, you would.
Yeah.
And so they go after people this way. And so this is where really, like somebody sues a poor schmuck like Nate over here sitting in his house. He probably doesn't have a whole lot of money, do you, sweetheart? No. But, when sometimes famous people or rich people or, people that have a lot of money, they commit acts like this or they get accused of acts like this, you could see where it's very lucrative for the victim to go after those people in a civil court as well. Most definitely, and it would be foolish not to. It doesn't really restore you because you can never really restore, and take away the experience. Money doesn't take away a horrible experience that you've been through. But the idea is that you're trying to compensate and you're trying to get as close as possible to what it would have been before the attack or before the issue. And this is with intentional torts and with also when we talk about negligent torts, which we probably won't get to today. Okay, false imprisonment. We started to talk about that the other day when I decided to lock Jack in my basement. And Jack thinks he's all clever and he's going to be telling somebody that where he's going to be and not get locked in my basement. But that was last week and I still have Jack in my basement. And so when he finally gets free, if he gets free, not only can I be criminally liable, but he can personally sue me for false imprisonment and for any physical trauma, for any lost wages, for any emotional trauma, any of that. He can sue me for false imprisonment. I'll tell you where this comes in handy for people. You know why when somebody is accused of stealing something like at the Walmart or something like that, the security has to be really careful about accusing somebody of stealing and detaining them and bringing them to the manager's office unless they are 100% sure, like they've got it on tape or they've got witnesses and they absolutely know that the person did it and has the product on them. Because if they don't allow someone to leave the store and they restrain them and bring them to the manager's office, they may end up getting sued for false imprisonment. So that's a very scary thing. Walmart does not want to get sued for false imprisonment. You as a business owner, as much as you want to prevent theft, you don't want your security to get overzealous and start holding on to people that maybe they shouldn't be holding on to if they don't have good proof, because you'll end up getting in trouble for false imprisonment. You'll be ending up paying a lot of money, and that person will never have to work again. Okay. Defamation. I kind of gave everybody a pass on the what'd you call it? On the oh my God, I've lost my mind. The discussion board this week, because I didn't really get a chance to go over it. There are slander, libel, defamation. Defamation is when you make a statement that harms a person's name or reputation. And that's dangerous because it can cause people to lose money. So in the case of the senator, I think a couple of you gave an example at the end about like, what if it was a headline that said senator is friends with rapist? Well, that could be defamation. Of course, there is a defense to defamation. What's the defense?
The defense to defamation?
Same as the defense to libel and slander, really. There is a good defense. Truth. But truth is a defense. But because you can't make up stuff about people. But you can't deliberately go out of your way to write things to defame somebody that's going to ruin their reputation or ruin their business. And cause them to lose money. So what I always say is, if you can't say something nice about somebody, just don't say anything. Just shut up. Don't give them a 5-star review. You know what I mean? So that's defamation. Invasion of privacy. When you unreasonably deny somebody else the right to be left alone. That standard is very different for private citizens like you and me, as opposed to famous people. So if you're famous, I mean, if you're Prince Harry or you're Khloe Kardashian, you've put yourself out there in the public eye. You don't have the same expectation of privacy that I have. If someone starts following me around with cameras, that's an invasion of my privacy. I'm a private citizen. I'm nobody. So for someone to do that, not only is it creepy, but that I would come after them for invasion of privacy. I would probably also, the government would probably also come after them for trespass if they're coming onto my property. But if you're famous, and famous people try this all the time, they get mad at reporters, they get mad at the media for invading their privacy. It's much harder for them to win those suits because they've put themselves out there. They've chosen to be public figures. Once you've chosen to be a public figure, you can't expect the kind of privacy that you and I can expect. Okay? I'm doing a lot of talking this morning, I know. Let's see. Misuse of, no, we won't talk about that one right now. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. You can be sued just for that, even if there's no accompanying physical injury. So let's say, for example, that I grabbed Joshua and I've got him sitting here in my house, and I know that Joshua loves his dog. You have a dog? Everybody loves their dog. If you don't love dogs, there's something wrong with you. That's number one right there. So I know he loves his dog, and I have told him for the last 5 days, I've kept him in my house. So yes, we know there's going to be a false imprisonment, but I've also told him that I have killed his dog, and I described to him in detail how I have tortured and harmed his dog. Joshua, you don't have to worry about it. I'm the last person on earth that would do this to an animal. I'd be more likely to do it to a human than an animal. Wait, I shouldn't have said that either. But imagine I release you and you find out your doggy's fine. But I have put you through living hell for 5 days, haven't I? I'm going to owe you for that. I have put you through such trauma. You may have PTSD now, for all we know. And what would you pay to not have PTSD for the rest of your life?
A lot, probably like $5 million.
Yeah, well, that might be what you come after me for. But I wouldn't harm your dog. I love dogs. Um, so that's an example of that. If you're leading someone to believe that you're causing harm to their family, even if you haven't, things like that, that's intentional infliction of emotional harm. You're deliberately trying to mentally torture somebody. And that's a tort. Somebody asking me something?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. What about like in school? Like
Oh, they torture you all the time in school.
well, well, like talking about like a bully or something, and is that same thing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think they're really cracking down on that stuff and making that more and more serious. I mean, I think cyberbullying or in-person bullying, that's definitely a form of assault, and it's definitely a form of intentional infliction of emotional distress. And if they bully a kid enough, and this has happened in some jurisdictions where, let's say, the child harms themselves or commits suicide, they can be gone after for murder and or wrongful death too. There was this case, I'm trying to remember where it was. I want to say Massachusetts, where like a girlfriend or an ex-girlfriend really kept pushing the issue with the boy that he'd be better off dead and should kill himself, and really kept hammering this away, and he did indeed kill himself. They went after her for that.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. So there really is, I think they've really taken bullying a whole lot more seriously now than they did. When I was a kid, everybody got bullied. You had to just suck up and take it, buttercup. But the bullying's gotten, I think, worse, because now people not only bully you at school, but they hunt you out on social media, and it's like a constant haranguement of bullying, for sure. Yeah. So don't bully people. That's not nice. I don't think you're a bully, Jacob.
I'd like to think not. Yes, ma'am.
Also, fraud is an intentional tort. Let's say that I'm selling my car to Diego, and of course this gets into some contract stuff that we're going to get into after the break. But let's say that I know darn well that my car is a crappy car, but I tell him that it's got a brand new engine, and I've just had it refurbished. It's in great condition, and he's not that bright, so he's going to trust me. And so he buys my car, and he drives it, and 3 days later, the engine falls out of the car because it's garbage. I specifically knew that I had a bad engine. I specifically knew that I lied. That's fraud in the inducement. And therefore, not only would I be potentially criminally liable, but I definitely would be tortiously liable to Diego for that, because I defrauded him and took his money. So he's definitely going to have to be restored to where he was before we had that transaction. Now, of course, if I didn't know, that's a whole other thing, like I probably know as much about cars as my cat. So if I really said to him, I think my car's in great shape, and I honestly don't know that it's not, and I sold it to him, he can't come after me for an intentional tort of fraud. You know what I mean? I mean, you have to know what you're doing.
Yeah, but how do I know if you know it or not?
Well, because it would be your responsibility as the plaintiff to prove that I knew. And anybody who knows me, and then once we bring in proof and knows about my limited knowledge of cars, like I know how to drive one, you would have to prove that I knew. That's the thing. Now, if you found out that in my background, I used to work part-time as a mechanic when I went through college, and I actually probably know more about cars than the average person, well, that would be in your favor. But if you are able to do research, you're an attorney, and you find out that, honestly, I mean, I don't know how to change my oil. I think I have AAA on speed dial. Then do I really know? I probably don't, you know. I mean, people can make mistakes. I mean, a lot of times it happens like you sell someone a house and you don't necessarily know all the things that are wrong with your house. The buyer has the right to inspect, but if the buyer doesn't, you're not necessarily liable for everything that goes wrong. I mean, I bought a house once and 2 months later, the air handler blew up. That was my first house. But I had it inspected. It wasn't caught on the inspection. I couldn't go after the previous homeowners for that. They had no reason to know that that was going to happen. I mean, stuff happens. So. What is that? It's like a radio or, okay. So, okay. So getting back to this. So those are pretty much the intentional torts. I think we went through all of these, the invasion of privacy, the intrusion. Also, with invasion of privacy, what would go along with that is also if you divulge information from confidential records. That's why these HIPAA laws and these FERPA laws really have a lot of teeth, is because you cannot invade somebody's privacy. People have the right to their private medical records. People have the right to their educational records. Now, when you talk about things like that are public record, like if I get on and I mention what, you know, I think Shamar has paid for his house, you know, that's public record. You can't keep stuff like that private. You can go on a property appraiser's website anywhere in the country and figure out things like where people's address and how much they paid for their house and stuff like that. That's not private. And those are things that you would think would be private. I mean, maybe they are in other countries, but in the United States, those things aren't private at all. So there's only a certain amount of privacy, but you do have the right to privacy for your healthcare information, and you do have the right to privacy for your educational information. So if your mama calls and asks me how you're doing in class, not only would it be unethical for me to tell your mama, but I'm not going to intentionally invade your privacy, because now that we've done chapter 6, you all will come after me for that. And why would I want to be guilty of an intentional tort? So I'm going to tell your mom, I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to say anything. You'll have to ask your son or daughter. That's what's going to happen. And it happens all the time. My husband's a professor. He just had a parent call him last week wanting to talk about their kid. He forwarded it on to the administration. He told them, he says, I'm not allowed to talk about your son or daughter. And that was it. He had to say that, because if he did, doesn't matter if mom and dad are paying the bills. If he did, he'd be in trouble. And he's married to me. He knows better than that. Okay. So let's see what else we have. Okay. That takes us over then to negligence, because sometimes we do things wrong and we don't mean to do things wrong. We have a lot of accidents in the world. And just because something's an accident or something is negligent doesn't mean that you're going to be off the hook for it. So this is where a lot of stuff happens that you think to yourself, oh my God, I didn't know and I didn't intend for anything like this to happen. For example, you know, when you hear about those cases, like somebody came to your door selling Girl Scout cookies or something, and they slipped on your porch and broke their leg. And you think to yourself, how could I possibly get in trouble for that? You came on my property. I didn't invite you. I don't even want your stinking cookies. Because let's be honest, Girl Scout cookies just ain't that good, right? Except for the Thin Mints. And so you're like, why am I getting sued when I didn't invite you? You came on my property. Like, I don't get it. Well, this is where the torts of negligence come in. So let's say that I have a loose brick. I have a little step that comes up to my front door. And let's say I have a loose brick. I know I've got this loose brick out there and I know I need to fix it. And if I wasn't so busy teaching you all, I would have had it done this morning. But, you know, y'all are just killing me this morning. So while I'm here talking to you all, my neighbor, she comes up to my door and she wants to talk to me about homeowners association. She steps on the brick. She breaks her knee. She breaks her leg. Now she's pissed off at me because she broke her leg on my loose brick. And I'm going, Judy, what the hell were you doing at my house? You could have just texted me. I was teaching. I was busy here with Jacob and Alex, and, you know, they kept asking questions and rambling, and they wouldn't let me off the hook this morning. And, you know, I couldn't get to you. Can she sue me? And will she win? Jacob, you're shaking your head no.
I mean, she came to your property, so you had no business on my property.
Yeah. I agree.
And you two would be wrong. Because as a homeowner, I have a duty to keep my property safe and maintained. Not only could she sue me, she would probably, almost definitely, I could almost guarantee you, she will be successful. And you're thinking, well, that's messed up, right? Let me give you another example.
So could you just go up to someone's house if you see so you could just see something wrong with someone's house, go up, get hurt somehow, and sue them practically?
Well, you wouldn't want to do that deliberately. Because then we're going to talk about this. That could be part of contributory negligence. I mean, you don't want to deliberately do that, because why do you want to injure yourself, Noah?
Well, I mean, if I'm injuring myself and I'm paying a quarter of what I'm getting off that person, then
Well, I suppose that's something. I mean, let's put it this way. There's people that claim like slip and falls in grocery stores and things like that. And people can, yeah. Oh, look, there was a puddle. I slipped and fell. Well, yeah, then they sue Publix and they may end up getting a lot of money. And there may be people who, when they see a wet floor, don't try to avoid it. You probably can only dig into that well once or twice before people get a hold of the fact that, you know, you've done that. But yeah, I mean, it could happen. I tell you, one day I was here at my house and my aunt that actually lives with me now, my husband's aunt actually, she was walking to her the car and she was leaving, and I have these stepping stones. And she missed her footing and she went rolling on the front yard. Now, I knew she wouldn't sue me because she's my husband's aunt, but I got to tell you, had she been a stranger, I would have held my breath for a moment. I would have gone, oh my God, because that would have totally been fair game for her to have done that. So let me give you an example of something else that you would just find mind-boggling, and then we'll probably pick the rest of this up later. But like, I have a small swimming pool in my backyard because I'm from South Florida, and I firmly believe that if you live anywhere in the state of Florida, you should have a swimming pool. And so I have to keep a fence, a locked fence around my swimming pool. And the reason I have to do that is not because of my own children, because my own children are 20 and 17. I'm not afraid that they're going to be idiots and fall in. But let's say the neighbor's children decide to come into my yard and they see my pool and they go, ooh, a pool, that would be fun. And they come into my pool and they drown. Are their parents going to get on me for wrongful death if I did not have that fence around?
What if you have like a screen enclosure? Does that count?
A locked one.
Okay.
Yeah, I know what you mean, like a screened-in pool. Yeah, it has to be. That's why you never see a pool without some kind of enclosure around it. It either has to be like a child safety gate. It either has to be like a screened porch, like a lanai. But again, I can't stand a screened-in pool. To me, the whole point of being in the pool is you're supposed to be out in the sun. Like that's the whole point. So everybody I know up here in Tallahassee has a screened-in pool. I refused. And I was told by my homeowner's insurance that I better put a locking fence around my pool. Why? Because you're thinking, well, the neighbor's bratty little snot-nosed kids shouldn't be coming into my yard uninvited and into my pool uninvited, right?
Yeah, they're gonna, little kids, they'll do whatever. They don't care.
And
They
big
can
kids
they can
too.
come anytime. Yeah.
And big kids too.
Yeah, and big kids too.
It could be. The fence is just like a normal like backyard fence, though. It doesn't have to be directly around the pool.
No, mine is directly around the pool.
No, but like for the law, though.
It's going to really depend on your homeowner's insurance company, but it's got to be somehow fenced in. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, for me, mine it's like a wrought iron fence. It's like, let's see, I'm 5 feet tall. So it goes to like here on me. It's like 4 feet tall and it locks. And so it's not easy to get into. A kid couldn't get into it. An adult could, but not if I keep it locked and I keep the key inside. So, and the reason for that is even though it's my house, my pool, my property, if you, your kids, somebody comes on my property and falls in the pool, hits their head in the pool, drowns in the pool, I'm going to be liable for it. Did I intend for someone to get hurt in my pool? Obviously not. There's no intent on my part. I don't want someone to get hurt. But I have to take precautions that would be considered negligence on my part, that I did not take every precaution that I could take to ensure the safety of others. This is where things really start to kind of suck, because this is like, not only do you have to think about every contingency of things that can happen, but it's like stuff you don't even think about, Did McDonald's think about the fact that somebody would burn themselves on coffee before they got sued? No. Now that it's happened, every cup of coffee you buy says caution, contents are hot. Because now they have to provide you with a warning, because apparently now we cannot assume that people know that coffee is hot. McDonald's didn't think about that before. They didn't want anyone to get burned with their coffee. I don't believe that they did that on purpose. Does anybody really think, do any of you think they did that on purpose? Coffee's hot, has been for years. But now that it's happened, we got to put a warning on it. Same with, just about anything. Toys that can be choking hazards for children. I mean, listen, when I grew up, every kid swallowed a toy, swallowed a penny, stuck a Lego in their nose. This was a rite of passage. Rivaldo, you just looked at me strangely. Don't make like nobody ever does that in the Caribbean. Come on, every kid shoves something in their nose at some time. I'm not saying I personally did, but every kid got an M&M up their nose at one point. And so you didn't really think about it until somebody sued the company. And now there's warning labels on there that says not for children under 3 or may contain small parts. That's the reason that stuff is all there. Okay. So questions on any of this? I know there's a lot more we're going to talk about with negligence, but questions on any of this so far before I take attendance? Okay. This is all the stuff that you can get sued for and in trouble for that you didn't even know you did wrong until after you do it. And so that's a big problem. Especially when you're a business owner, a homeowner, you have to think about all the things that can possibly go wrong. Somebody comes into your store and they trip and they fall. Bye-bye money. You're going down. Of course, this is why you carry insurance, but that's a lot of money too, and that's a discussion for another day. I'm going to take attendance real quick.